There are absences in the fabric of time, moments when human history seems to dissolve into silence. Between the echoes of stone and the whispers of dust, there are centuries that do not fit, civilizations that appear before their age, and ruins that should not yet have known how to stand. These voids are not blank pages, but erased ones, their ink washed away by floods, by fire, by deliberate hands. Every archaeologist who has brushed sand from a forgotten stairway has felt it. That uneasy pulse beneath the soil, the sense that what we call ancient might only be the surface of something older still. In Anatolia, layers of Göbekli Tepe rise from the 11th millennium BCE, where men carved cosmic animals long before the wheel or city existed. In India's Gulf of Kampat, sonar scans suggest submerged streets beyond known antiquity. Even the myths, the floods, the golden ages, the vanished islands seem less like imagination and more like memory bleeding through geological time. Was there an epoch before all epochs, an age unrecorded, whose remnants survive only in the distortions of myth, in the impossible precision of ancient maps, in the unspoken agreement of gods who once walked among men? Perhaps what we call prehistory is not before us, but beneath us. Welcome to historic sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. Beneath the quiet hum of the present, there lingers an unease, a dissonance in the story we tell about ourselves. History, in its proud chronology, feels too neat, too symmetrical, as if the scaffolding of human memory were assembled to hide something older, deeper, and more difficult to face. The record begins in Mesopotamia, they say, around 5,000 years ago, when clay tablets learned to speak and empires began to leave shadows. Yet scattered across the continents are traces that refuse to fit that timeline. Fragments that feel as if they were written in a language the earth itself has forgotten. Somewhere in the sands of Egypt, between the Giza Plateau and the lesser-known necropolises swallowed by shifting dunes, there are blocks of limestone whose weathering seems too ancient for the civilization that supposedly raised them. The Sphinx's eroded flanks bear the marks of rain, not the wind-blown abrasion of desert centuries, but vertical runoff, carved by storms that last drenched the Nile Valley over 10,000 years ago. It was the geologist Robert Schoch, not a mystic or priest, who suggested that the Sphinx might predate dynastic Egypt by millennia. Mainstream Egyptology resisted, of course, and yet the stone does not lie. In the depths of the Pacific, the Japanese island of Yonaguni holds another riddle. Beneath clear waters lies a massive staircase carved into bedrock, complete with terraces, ramps, and geometric walls so precise they seem drawn by engineers, not tides. Discovered by divers in the 1980s, it has been called the Yonaguni Monument. But the question remains whether it is a natural formation or the remnant of a civilization lost to rising seas at the end of the last ice age. When Professor Masaki Kimura mapped its structure, he found what looked like roadways, altars, and bas-reliefs. Others dismissed it as coincidence, as nature's accidental architecture. But coincidence, repeated at that scale, begins to feel intentional. Between these anomalies, a pattern begins to whisper. It is the same quiet murmur heard at Göbekli Tepe, the hill of the navel, where in the 10th millennium BCE, human hands raised monolithic circles of limestone 10,000 years before the pyramids, carved with foxes, vultures, and serpents aligned to the stars. It stands as proof that civilization did not simply begin with the invention of agriculture, but perhaps birthed agriculture itself as an afterthought. When the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt unearthed it, he remarked, "This changes everything." Yet even he could not answer who built it or why they buried it so carefully, as if hiding a memory too dangerous to preserve in open air. There are maps, too, unsettling in their precision. The Piri Reis map of 1513, drawn on gazelle skin by an Ottoman admiral, shows the coastlines of South America and Antarctica with a degree of accuracy unknown before modern surveying. The Orontius Phineus map, published in 1531, depicts Antarctica free of ice, with rivers and mountains where satellite imagery now confirms them. Some claim these are coincidences, the product of copying ancient sources whose errors aligned by chance. But others, like Charles Hapgood, argued that these cartographers inherited fragments of a far older world map, one drawn before the last great glaciation. Even Albert Einstein once commented that Hapgood's theory is not impossible, a phrase both cautious and haunting. Each anomaly, alone, could be dismissed, but together they hum like dissonant chords in the same buried symphony, a pattern too consistent to ignore. Could it be that our timeline has folds? That beneath the surface of history there are forgotten civilizations erased not by imagination, but by cataclysm? Flood myths from nearly every culture speak of an age drowned and renewed. The Sumerians called it the flood of Ziusudra, the Hebrews the deluge of Noah. In India, it was Manu's flood. In Mesoamerica, the waters rose to swallow the world of the previous sun. Modern geology confirms that around 12,800 years ago, a sudden climatic upheaval, the Younger Dryas, struck like a planetary reset. Temperatures plummeted, glaciers surged, and oceans rose by more than 100 meters as the last ice age collapsed. What vanished beneath that tide? Beneath Doggerland, between Britain and Denmark, lie forests and riverbeds now sealed under the North Sea. Archaeologists have dredged up antlers, tools, and the bones of mammoths, evidence of a lost landscape that once sustained thousands. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Kambat, sonar images reveal geometric formations resembling streets and foundations, now entombed under mud and silt. When samples of wood and pottery were retrieved, radiocarbon dating returned astonishing ages, some reaching 9,000 years before the present. Critics questioned the methods, the context, the interpretation. But the question lingered like a ghost over the water. What kind of culture could have existed when the rest of humanity was still learning to plant seeds? There is a pattern of amnesia in the human story, an unspoken rhythm of rise, collapse, and forgetting. Some call it the cycle of epochs, the yugas of Indian tradition. Satya, Treta, Dvapara, Kali, ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, repeating endlessly through cosmic time. Others speak of the 5 sons of the Aztec, each destroyed by fire, wind, or flood. These are myths, yes, but myths are memory coded in metaphor. Beneath their poetry might lie the sediment of truth. Perhaps our ancestors were not imagining the fall of ages. Perhaps they were remembering. In the cold data of geology, there are hints of something cyclical, too. Every 100,000 years, the Earth wobbles in its orbit, shifting the rhythm of ice and warmth. Solar storms and asteroid impacts leave chemical fingerprints in the strata. Around 12,900 years ago, a thin layer of platinum and microscopic glass spheres appears in soils across North America and Europe, evidence, perhaps, of a comet that shattered the climate and ended an age. That same moment marks the extinction of mammoths, mastodons, and the Clovis culture, a hunter society that vanished overnight. Could the same catastrophe have erased others whose remains we have not yet recognized? In South America, at sites like Puma Punku and Tiwanaku, stone blocks weigh hundreds of tons, cut with interlocking precision that modern engineers still debate. Some claim it is Inca, others pre-Inca. Yet the techniques seem to belong to an understanding of geometry that transcended simple quarrying. The Altiplano's altitude preserves silence, but not certainty. There is something uncanny about its perfection, as if those stones were the last whispers of an art learned from an older hand. And then, there are the myths of instruction. Gods or beings descending from the sky to teach humanity the arts of agriculture, metallurgy, writing. In Sumer, they were the Anunnaki. In Egypt, Thoth. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl. In Polynesia, Tangaroa. Their stories repeat the same archetype: knowledge arriving too soon, bestowed by visitors who vanished when their work was done. If such myths were purely symbolic, why do they appear in cultures divided by oceans and epochs? Perhaps what we are truly facing is not a lost civilization, but a lost continuity, a memory broken by catastrophe, rewritten by survivors who no longer understood the language of the ruins beneath their feet. Each discovery, from Yonaguni to Göbekli Tepe, is a tremor in the facade of certainty. Each time we unearth something that should not exist, we are forced to look again at the story we have built from the shards of the past. Yet it is not rebellion against science to ask. It is reverence. The pursuit of truth demands the courage to question the comfort of consensus. Perhaps the gaps in our record are not failures of discovery, but deliberate absences, an erasure written by the hand of time itself, or by something that wished to hide. For if there was once an age before ours, with knowledge greater than we dare imagine, its silence must be deafening. The night grows long in the museum of the world, and the air between artifacts feels heavier than stone. Somewhere, under layers of dust and doctrine, lies the echo of a vanished epoch, not fantasy, not myth, but memory. And if the earth could speak, would it tell us that we are not the first to stand at the edge of understanding, gazing back into darkness? The Sphinx watches still, her eyes half eroded, as if guarding not a tomb, but a truth too vast to utter. Perhaps the riddle was never about who built her. Perhaps it was always about what came before. When night falls over Anatolia, the limestone pillars of Göbekli Tepe glow faintly under the starlight, their reliefs of foxes, cranes, and abstract signs catching the moon like veins of memory. Archaeologists have mapped every circle, every carving, every shard of flint, and yet the question remains unanswered. Why would hunter-gatherers, long before the invention of cities, build something so monumental and precise? It is not a settlement. There are no homes, no graves, no signs of daily life, only sanctuaries, stone rings arranged with astronomical alignment, as if the builders had sought to converse with the cosmos itself. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, sealed beneath its own dust. It is as if its makers wanted to preserve a memory not for themselves, but for a world that would forget. Some believe it marks the dawn of human spirituality, the first temple, the first act of symbolic consciousness. Others see it as a monument of continuity, a message from an older epoch whispering through the newly awakened mind of Homo sapiens. Whatever its origin, Göbekli Tepe stands at the threshold between myth and history, where the line between what we imagine and what we inherit begins to blur. In the highlands of Peru, far to the west, another enigma gazes at the heavens, the Nazca Lines. Massive geoglyphs carved into desert plains, visible only from the air, depict hummingbirds, monkeys, and serpentine figures stretching for kilometers. They were etched into the desert by removing a thin layer of oxidized stone, exposing pale earth beneath. For centuries, they remained hidden from human eyes until aircraft first revealed their full scale. No one knows why they were made, though theories range from astronomical calendars to ritual walkways. Some have dared to ask whether they were signals, not to gods above, but to something else, something that once watched from the skies before retreating into legend. Between Göbekli Tepe and Nazca lies an ocean of time, yet both share the same silent precision, the same dialogue with the stars. The sky, it seems, was the first scripture humanity ever wrote upon. But what if the constellations we trace today are not ours at all? What if they are inherited? In the myths of Mesopotamia, the gods taught humans to name the stars. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, those who came down from the heavens. They bestowed knowledge, order, the arts of measurement and time. The myth reads like memory distorted by reverence, but one cannot ignore how suddenly, around 3500 BCE, writing, mathematics, and monumental architecture appear almost fully formed in Sumer. Civilization seems to have bloomed overnight, as if something or someone had accelerated the process. Mainstream scholars call it a coincidence of geography, the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates nurturing complex societies. Yet coincidence, again, becomes the language of dismissal. In the Epic of Atrahasis, the gods grow weary of laboring and create humankind to bear the burden of toil. But later, when humanity's noise rises too loudly, they send a flood to erase them. Only a chosen few survive, carrying fragments of knowledge into the next age. These ancient stories, written in cuneiform, mirror those of Noah, of Deucalion, of Manu, the same deluge retold across continents. Was there perhaps an ancestral trauma encoded in myth, a real flood that marked the boundary between worlds? The Younger Dryas catastrophe offers a chilling echo. Around 12,800 years ago, as the Ice Age waned, a sudden drop in global temperatures reversed the thaw. Geological cores show a spike in platinum and microscopic spherules, telltale signs of a cosmic impact. In North America, the Clovis people vanished. In Europe, megafauna died in waves. And somewhere, in the Near East, human culture was reborn, as if guided by memory rather than invention. Could Göbekli Tepe have been the temple of survivors, those who watched the sky burn and sought to preserve what remained of a lost science? In the Timaeus, Plato wrote of Atlantis, a civilization that perished in a single day and night of misfortune, swallowed by the sea. His account, though dismissed as allegory, contains specific details. Its size, its concentric canals, its location beyond the Pillars of Heracles, and its submergence after great floods and earthquakes. Modern researchers have speculated that Plato's source, the Egyptian priest Solon consulted, might have preserved older records, perhaps from a civilization that once existed during the same post-glacial floods that swallowed coastal plains worldwide. If such a culture had existed along the continental shelves, now drowned by the ocean, would we not have found traces by now? Yet the sea is a cruel archivist. It buries its dead beneath kilometers of sediment. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar surveys in 2001 detected vast geometric structures 1,000 meters beneath the waves, stone formations arranged like avenues and pyramids. The discovery sparked brief wonder, then quiet skepticism. The depths were too great, the evidence too fragmentary, the funding too fragile. The ocean keeps her secrets, and our curiosity, like our memory, has limits. But across traditions, there remains a peculiar echo. The idea that history moves not in a line, but in a circle. In the Mahabharata, the end of one age is always the seed of the next. When righteousness declines, it says, and unrighteousness rises, I manifest myself again and again. The pattern repeats: rise, fall, renewal. What if civilization itself is subject to geological cycles, not of morality, but of memory? What if every 10 or 20,000 years the Earth resets, and what survives is not knowledge, but myth? There are hints buried in the genes, too. Studies of mitochondrial DNA reveal that modern humans nearly vanished around 70,000 years ago, reduced to a population of a few thousand after the Toba supervolcano erupted. We are the descendants of survivors, inheritors of a world remade by ash and silence. If civilization had ever risen before that time, it would have perished utterly, its traces scattered like dust into the oceans. And yet, anomalies persist, fragments of craftsmanship or knowledge that should not exist where they are found. In coal seams dating to hundreds of millions of years, miners have reported metallic spheres and imprints that defy explanation. In the 19th century, the Koso artifact, a spark plug-like object embedded in solid rock, was claimed as evidence of forgotten technology. Most of these cases dissolve under scrutiny, exposed as errors or misinterpretations. But the pattern, the recurrence of out-of-place objects, ooparts as they're called, persists, a fascination as much psychological as archaeological. Why are we so haunted by the idea that something came before us? Perhaps because every human epoch senses the fragility of its own permanence. The notion of an earlier civilization challenges not only archaeology, but psychology. It forces us to confront our own ephemerality. What if our skyscrapers, satellites, and data centers are nothing more than another layer awaiting erosion, destined to become the enigmatic ruins of a future age? The half-life of memory is short. Within 10,000 years, steel will rot, glass will return to sand, and concrete will crumble to dust. The traces of our digital age, stored in magnetic whispers and light, may vanish entirely. What would a distant future think if it found only our bones and scattered relics? Would it believe in the cities we once built? History, after all, is not the record of what happened. It is the record of what remains. The gaps between those remnants are vast, and it is within those silences that imagination and possibility bloom. The lost epochs may not exist in stone or metal, but in the memory of the Earth itself, encoded in magnetic fields, in isotopic shifts, in stories repeated across civilizations like dreams, retold through generations. Perhaps that is why, when we look at Göbekli Tepe, or the Nazca Lines or the Sphinx, we feel not only wonder, but recognition, as if some ancient part of us remembers the shapes, the purpose, the ritual. Maybe these monuments are not messages from the past, but to it, beacons across the abyss of time, inviting the next civilization to rediscover what was forgotten. The night wind passes through the pillars on the Anatolian hill, and the constellations move as they did 12,000 years ago. Somewhere beneath the soil, under the weight of millennia, lie more circles yet to be unearthed. Each one a doorway, each one a whisper, and when they are uncovered, they will not simply tell us who we were, but who we have always been, wanderers on a planet that remembers everything. And still, as the stars drift over the buried temples, another question hums beneath the silence. If there truly was a lost epoch, an age of knowing now erased, what did it fear so much that it sealed itself beneath stone, awaiting rediscovery in our restless hands? There are moments when the past feels almost audible, like a pulse beneath the earth, faint but steady. In the deserts of Egypt, it murmurs through the wind that moves between ancient stones. The pyramids at Giza, those geometric enigmas, rise not just as tombs, but as a dialogue with eternity. Their alignment is uncanny. True north within a fraction of a degree, the three pyramids mirroring the belt of Orion, the shafts of the Great Pyramid angled toward specific stars. The more one measures, the less accidental it seems. Yet, the further we look for meaning, the deeper the mystery becomes. Archaeologists explain these alignments as the product of devotion and observation, that priests tracked the heavens over generations, charting the stars with the naked eye. But there is another possibility, rarely spoken aloud in the echoing chambers of academia. What if the architects were inheritors rather than inventors, rebuilding an ancient geometry passed down from a forgotten age? In the 1970s, engineer and mathematician Robert Bauval noticed that the layout of the Giza pyramids corresponded precisely to Orion's belt as it appeared around 10,500 BCE. Not at the time of Egypt's Old Kingdom, but thousands of years earlier, when the constellation sat lower on the horizon. His observation, controversial and captivating, suggested that the monuments encoded a celestial memory far older than the civilization itself. Egyptologists dismissed it as coincidence, yet that date, 10,500 BCE, echoes another event. The abrupt end of the Ice Age, the same moment the Earth warmed, glaciers melted, and seas rose to swallow coastal lands. Could Giza be a monument not to kings, but to survival? The ancient texts of Egypt speak often of Zep Tepi, the first time when gods ruled upon the earth before the age of men. They describe a civilization that emerged after catastrophe, guided by beings of wisdom who restored order from chaos. To modern ears, it sounds like myth, but the symbols carved upon temple walls often depict something eerily physical: long-headed figures, ships of light, floods, and rebuilding. Perhaps Zep Tepi is not fantasy, but a cultural memory, a mythic recollection of an epoch erased by flood and fire. In the same latitude, but across the ocean, the Mayan city of Teotihuacan mirrors the pattern. Its Avenue of the Dead stretches toward a pyramid complex arranged along astronomical lines. The Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent echo not only the sky, but the ratio of planetary distances. Beneath the Pyramid of the Sun lies a tunnel lined with pyrite, shimmering like stars in the dark, an artificial underworld, a replica of the cosmos below the earth. Its builders left no inscriptions, no names, only structures of impossible precision. Some researchers believe the city was already ancient when the Aztec arrived and named it the place where gods were born. From Egypt to Mexico, the geometry repeats, pyramids aligned with solstices, star patterns, and cardinal directions. The same triangular sanctuaries rise from China's plains, from the jungles of Cambodia, from the forgotten corners of Sudan. Across continents and millennia, the same mathematical language appears as if spoken by a single, vanished teacher. Was it convergence or continuity? If one traces the faint threads of this geometry, they seem to converge in the silence after the last ice age. The end of that epoch was not gentle. Meltwater pulses raised sea levels by hundreds of feet, drowning vast stretches of land. The Sunda Shelf, now beneath the waters of Indonesia, once held river systems and deltas large enough to feed millions. To the north, the lost continent of Sundaland may have connected present-day Borneo, Java, and Sumatra, a cradle of human settlement later swallowed by rising tides. Genetic studies hint that migrations from this region may have spread agriculture, language, and myth across the globe. Could the stories of lost Edens and sunken realms have begun there, beneath what is now the Java Sea? In 1883, the volcano Krakatoa erupted, destroying much of the island and sending shock waves around the world. Ancient Javanese texts, however, speak of an earlier eruption, a cataclysm so great it split the mountain that once joined the islands, plunging them into the sea. Geologists have found layers of ash that may support such an event around 11,000 years ago, coinciding eerily with the floods that reshaped the planet. If a civilization had existed in those vanished lands, its cities would now lie beneath hundreds of meters of ocean, invisible except to sonar and dream. Modern science has only begun to map the drowned world. Off the coast of India, in the Bay of Cambay, sonar scans reveal geometric patterns, what appear to be city blocks, walls, and canal systems stretching across the seabed. When artifacts were recovered, carbon dating suggested an age of nearly 9,000 years. Critics pointed to contamination, to misreadings of sonar, to the chaos of silt. But even if these were natural, why do they mimic human design so perfectly? Nature may carve beauty, but it rarely measures in right angles. Perhaps these hints are not isolated accidents, but echoes, faint reflections of an age whose name we have forgotten. In myths of the Pacific, Polynesian navigators speak of Hawaii, a motherland that sank beneath the sea. The Maori call it the place of origin. The Hawaiians remember Kahiki, the distant land beyond the horizon. The echoes ripple across myth like ripples across water, the same water that buried their ancestral coasts. And yet for every whisper of a lost world, there rises the voice of reason. Archaeologists argue that humanity's progress, though uneven, follows a discernible path, from stone to bronze to iron, from hunter to farmer to citizen. They remind us that civilization is fragile, that it grows only where environment and chance permit. To suggest an advanced society in deep antiquity, they say, is to rewrite the very rhythm of evolution. And still, the evidence lingers, unyielding as stone. The burden of proof lies between disciplines, geology, mythology, astronomy, and intuition. Science is cautious by necessity, but curiosity does not always obey boundaries. What if the ancients left behind messages not in words, but in architecture, equations encoded in monument and myth? The Great Pyramid's proportions encode the value of pi and the golden ratio. The same ratios appear in the Parthenon, in Mayan temples, in megaliths scattered across Britain. It is as though human design has always been haunted by an invisible mathematics, an inherited memory of balance. This pattern stretches beyond stone. Ancient myths describe the same gods by different names: Osiris, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Oannes. Each arrives from the sea after catastrophe, teaches humankind agriculture, astronomy, and law, and then departs, promising to return. Could these figures be memories of survivors? Remnants of an older civilization who, finding the world in ruin, seeded it anew? If so, their stories became our myths, and their monuments our mysteries. The silence of archaeology is not proof of absence. The Earth's crust swallows its own history with slow indifference. What we call ancient is merely what the soil has not yet devoured. Perhaps entire epochs have risen and vanished within those intervals. We find their shadows in fossilized pollen, in magnetic shifts, in isotopic scars left by vanished cities. Even the pyramids, those mountains of memory, will one day crumble into dunes. Yet the geometry, the knowledge they embody, may outlast the stone, carried forward again and again by civilizations that rediscover what was never entirely lost. At dusk, the desert air cools, and shadows lengthen across the limestone faces of Giza. The stars emerge one by one, aligning with silent precision. Somewhere, far below, an archaeologist's lamp flickers across hieroglyphs, lines that speak of beginnings, of floods, of restoration. The inscriptions say the gods came from the stars, brought order from chaos, and built monuments to preserve that order forever. Perhaps that was the true purpose of the pyramids. Not tombs, not temples, but lighthouses through time, designed to guide future eyes back to a forgotten truth. If so, the question remains: what truth did they fear we might forget? The wind moves softly over the plateau, carrying grains of sand from one era to another. Beneath the desert, beneath the layers of dynasties, there may still lie foundations older than the Nile itself, remnants of a first time when the line between man and God, myth and memory was not yet drawn. Perhaps the pyramids do not point toward eternity, but back to the epoch that built the first fire, raised the first stone, and named the stars not for worship, but for remembrance. And when night deepens, and Orion's belt glimmers directly above the ancient stones, one cannot help but wonder, were they trying to mark where heaven once touched the earth, or where the earth once fell away? The rain over South America often falls like memory, sudden, heavy, and ancient. In the high, windswept altiplano of Bolivia, where the air thins and sound dies quickly, lies Tiwanaku, a city of stone that seems less built than unearthed. Its great gateway, the Puerta del Sol, stands alone in the plateau, carved from a single block of andesite. The lintel bears figures in relief. A central being with rays emanating from his head, flanked by winged attendants who hold staffs and serpents. Archaeologists call him the staff god, a symbol found across the Andes, predating the Inca by millennia. Yet no one truly knows who he represents, or how old the city beneath him really is. Officially, Tiwanaku flourished around 400 to 1000 CE, but some early explorers, like Arthur Posnansky, argued that the site was far older, perhaps aligned to a celestial configuration visible only 12,000 years ago. He based his claim on the shifting angle of the Earth's axis, noting that the temple seemed oriented toward a sunrise long forgotten. His calculations, though dismissed by mainstream scholars, continue to haunt the site like a whisper that will not fade. If true, Tiwanaku's builders lived closer to the end of the last ice age than to the Inca Empire. The precision of the stonework defies the tools presumed available at the time. At Pumapunku, nearby, immense blocks of red sandstone weigh hundreds of tons, cut with interlocking H-shaped joints so exact that a razor blade cannot slip between them. The faces are polished flat, their corners sharp as machine edges. No quarries exist nearby large enough to explain their presence. The stones were transported from kilometers away, across uneven terrain. How did pre-Columbian people, without metal tools or wheels, achieve this level of engineering? Some suggest simple ingenuity, ropes, ramps, patience, but others sense a shadow of lost technique, the residue of knowledge forgotten and reinterpreted by later hands. Across the world, in Baalbek, Lebanon, the same mystery repeats itself in stone. The Temple of Jupiter rests on a platform of megalithic blocks, the largest of which, the stone of the pregnant woman, weighs more than 1,000 tons. Modern cranes would strain to move it. Beneath the Roman ruins, older foundations of even larger stones lie hidden, suggesting that the site was sacred long before the empire claimed it. In these ancient layers, as in Tiwanaku, the pattern persists. Monumental precision without clear ancestry, memory without lineage. Perhaps it is not that these builders were impossibly advanced, but that the line we draw between primitive and civilized is far thinner than we believe. Technology is only one language of memory. The other is alignment, a dialogue with the cosmos. When the Inca built Cusco, they called it the navel of the world. Its streets mirrored constellations, and its temples aligned with solar paths that marked planting and harvest. The entire Andean world was a clock, the sun crossing its axis, the shadow falling precisely on sacred stones. To them, architecture was not static. It was alive, pulsing with celestial rhythm. In the same hemisphere, further north, the Mayan city of Palenque rests amid humid forest, its towers piercing through mist like memories rising from dream. Inside the Temple of Inscriptions, archaeologists uncovered the sarcophagus of King Pakal, the lid carved with an image so strange that it transcended its time. The ruler is shown reclining backward, surrounded by flames and symbols, his hands manipulating levers, his body poised within what some see as a vehicle of flight. To the Maya, it represented his descent into the underworld, a cosmic journey of death and rebirth. To others, it seemed a blueprint of something else, something not entirely human. Such interpretations are often dismissed as fantasy, yet the persistence of the same motifs across distant civilizations invites reflection. Serpents that fly, gods that descend in fire, beings that promise to return. Whether in the Andes, Mesopotamia, or Egypt, the myths converge on an uncanny familiarity, as if humanity once witnessed something profound and then reimagined it through religion. Perhaps these are not literal accounts, but descriptions of technologies or natural phenomena now unrecognizable to us. Or perhaps they are metaphors for knowledge itself, descending and vanishing like a comet through the ages. Science, of course, warns against seeing pattern where none exists, but mythology, the subconscious of civilization, records what logic cannot. The shared archetypes, floods, sky gods, sunken lands, cycles of creation and loss, may be humanity's collective memory of survival. Each story, each monument, could be a verse in a single poem written across the continents, repeating the same refrain. We were here before, and we will be again. In the 1960s, scholars like Giorgio de Santillana and Ertha von Dechend proposed in Hamlet's Mill that ancient myths encode astronomical data, that stories of dying gods and turning heavens represent the precession of the equinoxes, a cycle of 26,000 years. If true, then myth is not invention, but transmission, a time capsule carrying knowledge through catastrophe. Could the builders of Tiwanaku, Baalbek, and Giza have inherited such astronomical wisdom from a forgotten culture that measured time not in years, but in ages? Even modern physics whispers a similar truth. The Earth is not static. It trembles with periodic resets. Solar cycles, geomagnetic reversals, asteroid impacts, each capable of erasing history in a single breath. The Younger Dryas boundary remains a scar of that kind, a planetary wound whose heat still resonates in myth. What if, before that cataclysm, there existed a network of cultures bound not by conquest, but by shared observation of the heavens, an ancient global memory that dissolved when the world burned and flooded? In the silence after disaster, knowledge becomes prayer. Survivors rebuild not what was lost, but what they remember of it. Over generations, precision becomes ritual, meaning turns to myth. By the time archaeologists arrive, all that remains are fragments, perfectly cut stones, inexplicable alignments, half-remembered cosmologies. And perhaps that is what Tiwanaku truly is, not the origin of civilization, but its echo. In the 20th century, beneath the site's cracked foundations, researchers discovered a layer of sediment containing seashells, evidence that the high plateau was once submerged, or at least lapped by ancient waters. If true, Tiwanaku might have stood at the shore of a vast inland sea long vanished. The image is haunting. A temple by the water, watching the waves retreat as epochs shifted. It mirrors the same image found in other myths, the world emerging from the flood, humanity climbing to high ground to rebuild. And maybe that is the heart of the mystery, that all civilizations, however distant, are remembering the same moment of rebirth. Each myth of gods descending or rising from the sea might be the same memory, refracted through language and time. The dawn after the deluge, the reawakening of humankind. The deeper one listens, the quieter it becomes. The wind through Tiwanaku's stones sounds like breath. When the sun sets, its rays align precisely through the gate of the sun, casting light on the carved faces of forgotten deities. It feels deliberate, as though the builders designed the monument to catch a memory, freezing it in light. Perhaps every ruin is a reflection of this longing, the need to outlast forgetting. We build not because we understand time, but because we fear it. Each stone, each carving, each alignment is an act of resistance against erasure. Maybe the lost epoch was not erased by nature or war, but by its own exhaustion, the knowledge that all things, even knowledge itself, must eventually sleep. As the night deepens, the Andean sky unfolds like a sea of glass. The stars above Tiwanaku shimmer in thin air, the same constellations that guided hunters, priests, and astronomers through the ages. Somewhere beyond that silence, in the cold vacuum of space, time bends and memory lingers. The earth, patient as always, turns beneath them, carrying its forgotten stories into another dawn. If there truly was a civilization before memory, perhaps its greatest monument was not in stone, but in the rhythm of the stars, a cosmic architecture that endures long after cities crumble. And when we look up, tracing the same constellations that once aligned to Tiwanaku and Giza, perhaps we are not discovering at all. Perhaps we are remembering. The wind sighs through the hollow blocks of Puma Punku, as if echoing from another time. And in that breath, faint and unending, there lingers the question that has followed humankind since the beginning. If our ancestors were not the first to awaken beneath these stars, then who were the ones that dreamed before us? The ocean holds its breath in ways the land never could. It conceals, distorts, preserves. Beneath its surface lie continents of silence, ridges and plains, where the bones of earlier worlds sleep. In its depths, pressure and time perform the work of forgetting. Cities become coral, memories dissolve into salt. Yet sometimes the sea gives back a whisper, a sonar ping, a shadow too geometric, a ruin that refuses to remain buried. In the North Atlantic, the myth of Atlantis has drifted for millennia like a ghost ship. Plato described it not as allegory, but as history passed down through Egyptian priests, an empire of engineers, rich in metals and wisdom, whose hubris angered the gods and drowned in a single day and night. Its capital was said to be a series of concentric rings of water and land, the same pattern seen in satellite imagery of the Rishat structure in Mauritania, an eroded geological dome once submerged under ancient seas. The resemblance may be coincidence, yet it tempts the imagination. When explorers fly over the Sahara's Eye of Africa, the desert light reflecting off its circular ridges, one cannot help but feel the echo of something long gone, a city swallowed not by ocean, but by time. Geologists tell us that much of the Sahara was once fertile, a vast grassland watered by rivers that fed into what is now the Mediterranean. The Green Sahara ended abruptly around 5,000 years ago, when the monsoon shifted and the rains ceased. But before that, the desert floor held lakes larger than modern Europe's inland seas. Beneath the dunes, radar imagery has revealed buried channels, ancient shorelines, and even possible settlements. The Sahara, like the sea, hides what once lived upon it. Perhaps Atlantis did not sink beneath the ocean, but beneath the sand. Far to the east, beyond the Indian subcontinent, there is another drowned world. Off the coast of southern India lies the Gulf of Mannar, where fishermen speak of submerged temples and the city that sleeps beneath the tide. This is Kumari Kandam, the mythical homeland of the Tamil people, said to have stretched far into the Indian Ocean before it was lost to the sea. Scholars once dismissed it as national myth, a southern echo of Atlantis, but modern bathymetric mapping shows the remnants of a sunken continental shelf, now called the Sunda Shelf. The same geological record that shaped Southeast Asia once extended across the Indian Ocean, binding lands that are now islands. During the last glacial maximum, when sea levels were lower, these regions were plains where rivers meandered and civilizations may have gathered. The possibility of a lost land connecting Africa, India, and Australia once inspired the 19th century hypothesis of Lemuria, a theoretical continent proposed by zoologists to explain the migration of lemurs and other species. Though later replaced by the theory of plate tectonics, Lemuria left its mark on cultural imagination. Theosophists and mystics turned it into an ancient realm of wisdom, a civilization that vanished beneath rising waters. While science discarded the landmass, the stories remained, suggesting that even fiction may be built upon fossils of forgotten fact. Modern sonar technology continues to map the seabed with increasing precision. Off the coast of Japan, at Yonaguni, divers discovered the massive submerged terraces, steps, plazas, and walls descending into the dark. The site's edges are too sharp, its symmetry too precise for easy dismissal. Geologists debate whether it is natural or artificial, yet both explanations seem incomplete. Perhaps it was both, a natural formation later modified by human hands, a collaboration between Earth and civilization now erased by the tide. Further north, in the North Sea, archaeologists have begun to uncover another ghost continent, Doggerland. 12,000 years ago, it connected Britain to Europe, a wide expanse of rivers, lakes, and forests populated by reindeer hunters and early settlers. As the ice melted, Doggerland sank slowly beneath the rising sea. Sonar scans have mapped valleys and riverbeds, and fishing trawlers have pulled up tools, bones, and even human remains. This was a world that vanished within human memory, swallowed gradually until only the myths remained. Stories of lands lost to the water. Perhaps that is why flood myths are universal. From Sumer to the Amazon, from Polynesia to the Arctic, nearly every culture remembers a time when the waters rose and the world was cleansed. The details differ: gods, heroes, boats, but the memory is constant. These are not the inventions of storytellers. They are the psychological fossils of survivors. For the generations that followed, such stories were the only way to explain the absence of their ancestors' cities, the ruins beneath the waves. In the West, the Greek philosopher Crantor once claimed to have seen hieroglyphic inscriptions in Egypt describing Atlantis as real history. Whether those inscriptions ever existed is uncertain, but what is undeniable is that Egypt's oldest dynasties seemed to emerge suddenly, their language and architecture mature from the start. Could their civilization have inherited remnants of knowledge from survivors of an earlier world? The possibility of a cultural inheritance, knowledge preserved through catastrophe, threads through archaeology like an unspoken truth. Stone, it seems, is the only medium that endures across ages. Perhaps that is why ancient peoples built in megaliths. Stone can outlast floods, fire, and empire. Its silence is the most reliable form of speech. When we find perfectly aligned temples beneath the Andes or precise cuttings on a submerged platform of the Pacific, we are reading fragments of that lost language. Even the modern ocean bears scars of older maps. The Piri Reis chart, drawn in the 16th century, depicts the Antarctic coastline without ice, a feature only confirmed by modern radar. Charles Hapgood, the historian who studied it, suggested it was copied from maps of an earlier civilization that charted the globe before the last glacial melt. His theory, though controversial, was intriguing enough to earn a cautious endorsement from Albert Einstein, who wrote that such a hypothesis is not impossible. The phrase lingers like a key in a lock that no one dares to turn. Our oceans are still largely unexplored, more alien than the surface of Mars. We have mapped only a fraction of the seabed, and each new scan reveals patterns that question our assumptions. Ancient river deltas beneath the Black Sea, submerged terraces off Cuba, straight lines and circles buried in silt. Some are natural, some are not. All remind us that history is far older than its surviving stones. Yet for every whisper of the lost, there comes the skeptic's voice, grounded, necessary, relentless. Science demands evidence, not echoes. It warns against the seduction of myth. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, they say, and they are right. But proof, too, can drown. The ocean does not yield easily. It buries what it takes. Perhaps the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but of depth. There is a strange comfort in that thought. To imagine that beneath the waves, beneath the crushing silence, a record still exists. The memory of who we were, who we might have been. The ocean does not forget. It only waits for us to learn how to listen. At twilight, when the tide retreats, the shoreline gleams with the faintest of inscriptions. Shells, stones, driftwood carried from elsewhere. Each fragment is a syllable in the planet's slow, unending language. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beneath kilometers of dark pressure, lie the cities of those who came before. Perhaps they are not meant to be rediscovered. Perhaps their silence is the final lesson, that even knowledge must learn to drown, to be reborn in those who will seek it again. The sea is a mirror. It reflects not only the sky, but the memory of what the sky once saw. And when we gaze upon it, we are not looking outward, but backward, into the long, tidal breathing of the world. For in every wave, in every whisper of foam and current, there is the pulse of a forgotten epoch calling faintly through time. And so the question endures, heavy as the water itself. If the ocean remembers everything, what name does it murmur when the moon pulls upon its heart? There are places on this planet where the air itself feels older, where silence is not absence, but density, as though sound would fracture if it dared to move. One of those places lies beneath the ice. Antarctica, that vast white labyrinth of storms and memory, conceals a story humanity has only begun to imagine. It is the last frontier, not because it is remote, but because it is hidden. Beneath kilometers of glacial armor lie mountains as tall as the Alps, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and freshwater lakes sealed for millions of years. It is a continent locked in time, a vault of geological secrets, perhaps even historical ones. In 1513, the Ottoman admiral Piri Reis drew a map that would become one of the strangest artifacts in cartography. On the parchment, he depicted the western coasts of Africa and South America with uncanny accuracy, and below them, a coastline that appears to match Antarctica. Yet Antarctica, as far as official history tells us, was not discovered until 1820. More disturbing still, the landmass on Rice's map is shown free of ice, displaying river systems and mountain ranges that correspond closely with modern radar surveys conducted beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. How could a 16th-century admiral have access to such information? Piri Reis himself claimed his map was based on older sources, ancient charts inherited from early kings, and the maps of Alexander. Charles Hapgood, in his 1966 book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, proposed that Piri Reis and others had copied from charts created by an unknown seafaring civilization that mapped the globe when Antarctica's coasts were ice-free, a period no later than 6000 BCE and possibly as early as 12,000 BCE. This timeline aligns not with recorded history, but with the end of the last ice age. His theory, though rejected by mainstream academia, attracted the attention of Albert Einstein, who wrote that Hapgood's ideas deserved serious consideration. If such maps truly existed, they imply a level of global exploration that our history doesn't allow. What if, long before the Phoenicians or Polynesians, before Egypt or Sumer, there were mariners who crossed oceans we have since forgotten? The notion unsettles, for it suggests that our civilization is not the first to look outward, merely the latest to remember how. Modern science has begun to pierce Antarctica's veil. Beneath its kilometers of ice lies Lake Vostok, a body of water sealed off for at least 15 million years. Its dark depths harbor microbial life unknown elsewhere on Earth, perhaps adapted to total isolation. If life can endure there, it can endure almost anywhere, under frozen moons, in the aftermath of cataclysms, even between epochs. And if it endures there now, what might have existed there when Antarctica was green? Satellite imagery reveals patterns, linear anomalies buried beneath the snow, geometric ridges that seem too regular to be purely glacial. Some interpret them as crevasses, others as subglacial formations. Yet the imagination strains to silence itself when confronted with symmetry in a land untouched by human hands. In 2018, explorers in Antarctica's Queen Maud Land stumbled upon a perfectly conical mountain rising from the ice, eerily resembling the pyramids of Giza. The photographs ignited speculation. An Atlantean outpost, an ancient power station, a natural coincidence carved by wind and ice. Perhaps the mind, when faced with the void, projects meaning onto the cold. Yet perhaps the cold remembers. Antarctica was not always frozen. Geological records show that 30 million years ago, it was lush and temperate, covered in forests where marsupials roamed. Even as recently as 12,000 years ago, sections of its coast may have been ice-free, green with tundra and moss. Fossilized pollen, marine sediments, and isotopic analysis support this vision. If humans existed then, and Göbekli Tepe tells us they did, is it impossible that they reached the southern edge of the world? A seafaring people, navigated by stars older than our myths, mapping coasts that would soon disappear beneath a new ice age. The very name Antarctica carries a paradox. The land opposite the Arctic, a mirror of the North. Ancient Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Aristotle speculated that such a land must exist to balance the world's mass. Roman scholar Pomponius Mela even depicted a terra australis incognita, the unknown southern land, in the 1st century CE. How did they conceive of a continent they had never seen? Intuition, geometry, or inherited memory? The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 adds another layer to this enigma. It too shows Antarctica free of ice, with rivers, mountains, and bays remarkably consistent with today's radar-mapped terrain. The coastline aligns more closely to the subglacial landmass than to the frozen outline visible today. Hapgood saw this as further proof of a source civilization that mapped the world before the last glaciation, long before recorded history. Critics argued that cartographers simply misinterpreted South America or the imaginary terra australis common in Renaissance maps. Yet the precision remains disquieting. If coincidence, it is an extraordinary one. The legends of the world's oldest peoples seem to whisper similar things. The Hopi speak of 4 worlds, the 4th being ours, each destroyed by flood, fire, or ice. The Polynesians tell of Hiva, a motherland swallowed by the sea, from which their ancestors sailed. The Maori recall a lost southern land, Even the Norse myths speak of Ginnungagap, the primordial void of ice and fire that birthed the world. Myth, once again, mirrors geology, creation and destruction, repeating through cycles of climate and time. Some researchers have wondered whether the continent's magnetism, its vast ice mass and gravitational anomalies, might preserve more than just climate records. During World War II, secret expeditions to Antarctica sparked legends of hidden bases, Nazi relics, and contact with lost technologies. Most of these tales are fantasies born from paranoia and post-war myth-making, yet their persistence reveals something deeper: our instinct to sense the unknown beneath the known. We project mystery onto the ice because it refuses to speak. But there are scientific mysteries here too. Satellite measurements have revealed unusual heat sources deep beneath the ice sheet, as though geothermal activity were concentrated along specific linear bands. Could these be volcanic? Almost certainly. Could they also coincide with the buried mountain chains and strange subglacial shapes seen on radar? They do. What lies beneath those coordinates remains unreachable, at least for now. The South Pole is not only the axis of the Earth's rotation, it may also be the axis of its amnesia. Magnetic reversals, cosmic impacts, and continental drift all converge in Antarctica's geological record. Perhaps it is not merely the end of the world, but the archive of its previous iterations. When ice cores are drilled there, they trap the breath of ancient atmospheres, tiny bubbles holding air from 50, 60, even 800,000 years ago. Each layer of snow is a page in a frozen scripture written in isotopes and ash. And sometimes, within those layers, scientists find anomalies, spikes of radioactivity, traces of extraterrestrial dust, microscopic fragments of unknown origin. There is a haunting thought that arises from this. What if the record beneath the ice tells not only of natural change, but of civilization, not ours, but one that came before, erased by the very glaciers that now guard its memory? It is a question too vast for proof, too heavy for certainty. But the silence above the ice feels almost conscious, as if aware that the truth must remain frozen until we are ready to bear it. At the edge of the Ross ice shelf, where the horizon glows like liquid glass, scientists have drilled through half a kilometer of ice to reach the waters below. Cameras reveal strange life, translucent fish, mats of bacteria, organisms thriving in darkness. It is a reminder that life persists even in the most desolate of places. Perhaps civilization, too, has such resilience, disappearing when the climate demands it, waiting beneath the surface for its next awakening. In the quiet hours of the polar night, when the aurora paints the sky in green fire, the ice seems to breathe. The wind moves like memory across its surface, carrying whispers that no one can hear. Maybe the continent is not lifeless at all, but dreaming, its glaciers pulsing with the slow heartbeat of the planet itself. Every age has its witnesses, and perhaps Antarctica is the last witness of them all. When the ice finally melts, as it is melting now, what stories will it release? What forgotten shorelines, what bones of cities, what relics of an epoch erased? The thought is both terrifying and beautiful. It suggests that the end of the world is not destruction, but revelation. And so the great silence continues. Beneath the ice, under pressure and time, something waits. Whether it is the trace of an ancient civilization, a geological secret, or simply the echo of our own desire to remember, no one can yet say. But as the polar winds circle endlessly, they seem to carry a question, one that has followed humanity across every epoch, every flood, every flame. If the ice remembers everything, what will it tell us when it finally begins to speak? Some stories do not begin on land or sea, but in the dark between the stars. For centuries, civilizations have looked upward, wondering if what they worshipped was ever watching back. Across the ancient world, from the Sumerians of the Fertile Crescent to the Dogon of Mali, from the Hopi mesas of North America to the temples of Egypt, the same pattern unfolds, the descent of knowledge from the heavens. Myths tell of luminous beings who taught humankind writing, agriculture, mathematics, the calendar, and the ways of the stars. The names differ: Anunnaki, Nomo, Apkallu, Watchers, but the script remains the same. Humanity receives, then forgets. In Mesopotamia, the oldest tablets speak of the Anunnaki, those who came from the sky. They were described not as spirits, but as beings of substance, tall, radiant, wielding tools that shimmered like metal. They governed the heavens and the earth, shaping rivers and kings. The story of creation in the Enuma Elish describes how they fashioned humanity from clay mixed with divine essence, so that men might serve as caretakers of the world. Archaeologists call this mythology. Yet within those same texts are precise astronomical records, tables of planetary motion, lunar cycles, and celestial alignments accurate to a fraction of a degree. How did a civilization emerging from mud brick villages acquire such mastery of the stars? The Dogon people of Mali offer another whisper from the same chord. For centuries, their oral traditions described the invisible companion star to Sirius, a dense, heavy object that completed an orbit every 50 years. In 1844, Western astronomers first hypothesized Sirius B, and by 1862, it was observed through a telescope, exactly as the Dogon had said. They also claimed their knowledge was given to them by amphibious beings, the Nomo, who descended from the sky in a great vessel accompanied by thunder and wind. Anthropologists recorded these stories long before the Dogon could have learned of such astronomy through modern contact. Coincidence, perhaps, or memory resurfacing through myth. In Egypt, Thoth, the ibis-headed god, was the scribe of the heavens, the keeper of secret knowledge, the inventor of writing. He, too, was said to have descended in a time before the flood, bringing law and measurement to chaos. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, arrived after a deluge, teaching the people how to plant maize, calculate the calendar, and rebuild. In Peru, Viracocha emerged from Lake Titicaca, bearded and cloaked in white, restoring order to a shattered world. In each story, the divine is not abstract. It walks among men, builds cities, and vanishes when its work is done. To see these parallels is to step into dangerous territory, where archaeology trembles at the edge of theology. Were these gods metaphors for cosmic cycles, or literal memories of contact with something beyond the human? The Book of Enoch, a text once considered sacred but later excluded from the biblical canon, speaks of watchers who descended to teach humankind metallurgy, enchantment, and the signs of the stars, knowledge that led to both advancement and ruin. The Watchers were punished for transgressing the boundaries between heaven and earth. It is a story of forbidden enlightenment, of knowledge descending and the world resetting itself in consequence. Some researchers, from Zecharia Sitchin to more cautious scholars of comparative myth, have wondered whether these ancient tales encode memories of real encounters, not with gods, but with beings mistaken for them. If a civilization before ours reached the stars, or if visitors once came from them, their legacy would not survive in machines or metal, but in myth. Knowledge transformed into ritual, engineering into worship. Over time, the truth would dissolve into poetry, leaving behind only the pattern. Descent, gift, departure, flood. Skeptics call this romantic nonsense, and perhaps it is, yet it is curious how mythology and archaeology often converge at points where both should be silent. The Sumerian texts list kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years before the flood, reigns dismissed as symbolic, yet corresponding eerily with geological transitions between ice ages and warming periods. The Dogon's orbital data for Sirius, the precision of Egyptian celestial alignments, the Maya's understanding of precession, all seem to exceed the needs or capacities of their time. It is not proof, but it is residue, the faint scent of an older fire. If knowledge did descend from the sky, then where did it go? Perhaps it did not vanish, but migrate, traveling along trade routes, whispered through priesthoods, encoded in architecture. The same golden ratios and stellar alignments appear in megaliths from Stonehenge to Angkor Wat. The same myths of the teacher god echo through continents. The same obsession with the stars, not for navigation, but for remembrance. Maybe humanity has been trying to rebuild a cosmic conversation that was once broken. In ancient India, the Mahabharata describes flying machines called vimanas, powered by light and sound, capable of crossing continents and heavens. In the Samarangana Sutradhara, an 11th century Sanskrit text, entire chapters are devoted to mechanical birds that fly using mercury and iron, an invention so advanced that even its author warns it should remain secret. These texts are dismissed as allegory, yet they are oddly specific, describing propulsion, materials, and flight paths in detail. Could they be remnants of a technology once witnessed, then mythologized? Or are they evidence of imagination that surpasses reason, of minds dreaming what would not exist for millennia? There is a strange humility in acknowledging that the line between science and myth was once blurred. To our ancestors, the divine and the physical were not separate realms, but aspects of the same truth. A comet was not merely ice and dust, but a messenger. A star was not a ball of fire, but a god's eye. What we now call physics, they experienced as revelation. Perhaps that perspective is what we have lost, the ability to see knowledge as sacred. And yet, amid all speculation, there remains the undeniable evidence of time itself, layers of sediment, strata of civilization. If there was an epoch before ours, touched by knowledge we can barely name, it would not announce itself with spacecraft or machines. It would echo in alignments, in mathematics, in the myths that refuse to die. Perhaps the ancients did not misunderstand their gods. Perhaps we misunderstand our ancestors. Even modern astrophysics entertains a thought that borders on myth. The panspermia hypothesis, that life on Earth may have originated from elsewhere, implies that we are, in a literal sense, children of the stars. DNA itself may be a message written in universal code. If so, the descent of knowledge from the heavens was not an isolated event, but an ongoing one, evolution itself as a dialogue between cosmos and consciousness. At night, when the stars burn with indifferent patience, one realizes that the same constellations have witnessed every rise and fall. If ancient builders aligned their monuments to Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades, it was not out of superstition but recognition. The sky was the only constant, the clock by which worlds measured their lifespans. Civilizations pass, myths mutate, but the stars remain. And perhaps, across the uncounted millennia, something or someone has been watching those who still remember how to look up. Skepticism insists that such thinking is a human need for meaning projected onto the void. Yet the void has a way of responding. Radio telescopes detect mysterious signals, fast radio bursts, repeating at intervals measured in cosmic heartbeat. Pulsars flash with unnatural precision. Space probes encounter mathematical symmetries in radiation belts, patterns that mimic intention. We dismiss them as coincidence because we must. To admit otherwise would collapse the boundary between science and myth once again. Maybe that is the point. Maybe the old myths were never lies, only translations. Each age decodes the same signal in the language it can bear. For the Sumerians, it was divine descent. For the Dogon, celestial teachers. For us, it is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The vocabulary changes, the longing does not. And if, somewhere in the dark ocean of stars, there truly are beings older than time, perhaps they do not intervene anymore. Perhaps they are waiting, as they have before, for us to rise, fall, and rise again. For the next cycle to begin. The forgotten epoch may not have perished in flame or flood, but ascended into silence, leaving behind monuments, myths, and questions to awaken its descendants. The sky is quiet tonight. But quiet is not the same as empty. Somewhere, light older than humanity travels still, carrying the memory of those who once gazed upward and saw home. Perhaps we are not seeking the heavens at all. Perhaps we are only trying to return. In the caves of southern France, there are paintings older than civilization itself. The walls of Lascaux and Chauvet bloom with ochre horses, bison, and lions, creatures painted 40,000 years ago by hands that trembled between animal and god. The pigments still glow in the flicker of torchlight, vivid as the day they were laid. To stand before them is to feel something uncanny, not just art, but awareness. These were not primitive doodles, not mere depictions of prey. The animals are layered, moving, breathing, as if captured between worlds. Some scholars call it the birth of symbolic thought. Others sense something deeper, a flicker of inheritance, knowledge awakening from an older source. The question has lingered for decades. How did consciousness ignite so suddenly? For nearly 2 million years, hominins crafted crude tools of stone and bone, their lives steady as the tides. Then, without warning, came language, music, geometry, and art. Archaeologists call it the Great Leap Forward, as if the human mind took a breath it had been holding since the dawn of time. But what triggered that breath? Mutation? Environment? Divine spark? Or memory resurfacing after a long silence? In Göbekli Tepe's carved animals and Lascaux's flickering beasts, we see an echo, not the beginning of imagination, but its return. It is as though humanity remembered something forgotten, some earlier vision of order and meaning. The myths of ancient peoples speak of golden ages before the fall, epochs of harmony when humans spoke with gods and understood the language of creation. The Greeks called it the Age of Kronos, the Hindus the Satya Yuga, the Mesoamericans the first sun. Each ended in catastrophe, and with each rebirth, the world grew smaller, rougher, more forgetful. Perhaps the real lost civilization wasn't built of stone or metal, but of thought, a unity of mind and nature that our species once possessed, and then lost to time. There are moments when archaeology seems to hint at such memory. The Neolithic stone circles of Britain, long before the Druids, were not random alignments but precise astronomical instruments. At Newgrange in Ireland, the winter solstice sunrise pierces a narrow passage, illuminating a chamber carved with spirals and stars. Thousands of kilometers away, in Nabta Playa, an ancient lakebed in Egypt's desert, megaliths form a calendar circle aligned to Orion. These were not primitive farmers. They were sky readers, synchronizing the pulse of their lives with the rhythm of the cosmos. This pattern repeats across continents, suggesting not isolated genius, but shared inheritance. Could a forgotten civilization, perhaps scattered by the floods at the end of the Pleistocene, have seeded this knowledge? The myth of the 7 sages appears in Sumer, India, and Greece, always 7, always bearers of wisdom after disaster. In the Matsya Purana, the first sage survives a flood guided by a divine fish. In Greece, they become philosophers who preserve moral law. In Sumer, they are the Apkallu, half-divine beings who teach mankind before the deluge. Their task is always the same: to rebuild, to remember. Memory, however, is fragile. It decays not only in the mind, but in culture. When writing appeared, it anchored history, but it also froze myth, turning fluid story into fixed symbol. The oral world, where truth was living and adaptive, became a world of record and argument. The farther humanity advanced in knowledge, the farther it drifted from memory. Progress, it seems, carries the price of forgetting. Even the landscapes of the mind bear fossils. Jung called them archetypes, ancient forms that persist in dreams and religion. He believed the psyche remembers what history forgets. Floods, towers, serpents, gods, not events, but recurring symbols etched into the collective unconscious. The myth of the flood may not be a single story, but the echo of many collapses. Each culture, waking from its own ruin, reshaped the same trauma into language. The mind itself became the archive of lost epochs. Science, in its modern form, also seeks memory, not through myth, but through matter. In Greenland's ice cores, in the sediments of ocean floors, we read the planet's autobiography. Layers of fire, water, and silence. The younger Dryas boundary, around 12,800 years ago, carries a whisper of sudden cataclysm, platinum-rich dust, meltwater pulses, species vanishing. The geological record is not myth, but its reflection. The Earth remembers even when we do not. Yet the more we uncover, the more ancient the enigma grows. Human footprints in Mexico dated to 23,000 years ago. Carved mammoth bones in Siberia bearing patterns too deliberate for accident. Stone structures beneath the Black Sea, submerged since the Great Melt. Each discovery stretches the timeline of civilization, bending it toward an age we are not prepared to acknowledge. And each time, the establishment pushes back, as though reality must remain within the bounds of what we already believe. But the Earth is indifferent to belief. It will continue to speak through fossils, through strata, through light. Light, after all, is another kind of archive. When we gaze at distant stars, we see them not as they are, but as they were, photons traveling across millennia. The universe, in a sense, is a museum of the past, where every act of observation is an act of time travel. Perhaps consciousness itself operates by a similar law, perceiving not only the present, but faint impressions of what came before. Could our fascination with ancient mysteries, our yearning for the lost, be the psychic residue of something our species once lived through? Some traditions suggest that knowledge is not learned, but remembered. In Plato's dialogues, learning is anamnesis, the recollection of truths the soul already knows. In the Vedas, the rishis do not invent hymns. They hear them, as if tuning into an eternal frequency. What if humanity's progress is not a ladder, but a spiral, each epoch rediscovering fragments of a wisdom buried deep within consciousness? That would explain why the same ideas, symbols, and architectures recur across time. Not diffusion, but remembrance. The idea of cycles, of ages turning and returning, permeates ancient thought. The yugas, the suns, the kalpas, each ends in destruction, each begins anew. Modern astrophysics, too, now speaks of cycles, oscillating universes, repeating epochs, cosmic resets. The difference between myth and science may only be language. Both attempt to describe what cannot be directly remembered. That creation and destruction are one breath. There is a loneliness in realizing that we may not be the first to ask these questions. Perhaps others before us pondered the same. Civilizations erased, staring into their own night skies, wondering if they were alone. Their temples, their scripts, their songs may all have been ways of preserving a single idea, that nothing truly vanishes, only transforms. In every ancient ruin, there is a silence that feels intelligent, not empty, but aware. The wind over Machu Picchu, the stillness of Stonehenge, the echo in the Great Pyramid, they hold a kind of listening, as though the stones themselves remember the hands that shaped them. Memory, once imprinted, never dies completely. It waits in matter, in vibration, in field. Some physicists have begun to suggest that information cannot be destroyed, that every particle retains the record of its past interactions. If so, then the universe itself is an archive, and the past is never truly gone. The more one contemplates this, the more the distinction between myth and physics begins to blur. The ancients spoke of the Akashic record, an etheric field that preserves all knowledge and experience. Quantum theory speaks of information fields, entanglement, the persistence of data across space-time. Perhaps they are the same insight expressed through different tongues. Perhaps the universe, in its vast patience, keeps a perfect memory of every civilization, every thought, every lost epoch, and consciousness, like a tuning fork, resonates with what it once knew. In that sense, archaeology is not about digging into soil, but into time. Each artifact is a fragment of thought, each ruin a mirror. We are not discovering the past, we are remembering ourselves. When the first archaeologist brushed dust from a buried statue, the gesture was not merely scientific, it was devotional, an act of reconnection. Humanity has always been haunted by amnesia, and every excavation is a small victory against forgetting. But perhaps there are things the earth withholds on purpose. If cycles truly repeat, then some knowledge must sleep until the next dawn. There may be truths too vast, too dangerous, too luminous for an age still learning how to see. That is why the deepest mysteries remain just out of reach, not hidden by conspiracy, but by compassion. Night falls again over the ancient caves. The painted animals glow faintly in the lamplight, their eyes alive with motion. A handprint appears among them, the signature of someone who lived 40 millennia ago, who reached across time to say, "I was here." In that gesture, simple and eternal, the boundary between past and present dissolves. The same hand that once pressed against stone now writes, builds, dreams. The same hunger, the same awe. Perhaps humanity itself is the memory of a forgotten civilization, reborn to remember what it once knew, inch by inch, light by light. And in that realization lies a quiet grace. The past was never lost. It only waits for us to wake. There are ruins so silent that standing among them feels like standing inside a thought that has forgotten itself. Beneath the jungles of Central America, in the valleys of Cambodia, and under the soil of forgotten continents, the architecture of human memory lies reclaimed by roots and moss. Civilization, it seems, is a cycle of remembering and erasure, a pulse that rises from the ground, flourishes, and returns to it again. Yet in that endless rhythm, questions persist like embers. How many times has the flame of human knowledge been lit before, and how many times extinguished? In the dense rainforests of Guatemala, LiDAR scanning has revealed networks of causeways, pyramids, and cities stretching for hundreds of kilometers. The Maya world, once thought to be isolated kingdoms, now appears as a vast interconnected civilization. Beneath the soil, their roads form the veins of a living organism. The scale is staggering, older and larger than historians ever imagined. Yet even this grandeur may be only the latest bloom upon a much older root. In Belize and Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, beneath known Maya ruins, lie foundations that predate them by millennia, layers upon layers of construction, as though each epoch built upon the bones of another. Further east, the jungles of Cambodia hide Angkor, a metropolis that once held 1 million souls. The temples of Angkor Wat and Bayon stand as stone mandalas, earthly reflections of cosmic geometry. Scholars have mapped its hydraulic systems, canals, and reservoirs, engineering so sophisticated that even modern urban planners marvel at its design. But Angkor, too, fell into silence, consumed not by war, but by climate. Droughts, floods, and the slow retreat of faith. Its temples became forests, its maps erased. Civilization is not destroyed by violence alone. Sometimes it simply forgets to remember itself. The same story unfolds in the deserts of Iran, where the ruins of Persepolis rise from dust like the memory of fire. Carved reliefs show processions of nations bringing tribute to the Persian kings, an empire of order and artistry. Yet its foundation rests upon older layers: Elamite cities, Sumerian echoes, Akkadian prayers. Beneath each kingdom lies another, as if history were not a line, but a spiral. The archaeologist, brushing sand from a broken tablet, is not uncovering history. He is eavesdropping on its repetition. What if civilization is not a progression but a pulse? Each age of knowledge peaks, collapses, and leaves its resonance in the next. The ancients called this the Great Year, a cosmic cycle of rise and fall tied to the movement of the stars. The precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of the Earth's axis over 26,000 years, marks epochs in myth as yugas or suns. Plato spoke of it in Timaeus, ages renewed by celestial fire or flood. The Maya encoded it in their long count calendar, measuring time in cycles of rebirth. Perhaps history is not random at all, but tidal, an intelligence larger than humanity breathing in and out through millennia. Modern historians measure collapse through droughts, wars, or plagues. But what if those are symptoms, not causes? What if each reset is woven into the very fabric of existence, the universe's way of recalibrating awareness? When the stars shift, perhaps consciousness itself realigns. The myths of the ancients, describing floods of water or fire, may have been metaphors for floods of time, moments when reality's frequency changes. In those transitions, knowledge dissolves, not lost, but transformed into myth for the next awakening. The ruins of Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley whisper another story. Streets laid with perfect right angles, drainage systems rivaling modern infrastructure, weights and measures standardized across thousands of kilometers, and yet no palaces, no temples of worship, no obvious hierarchy. It was a civilization of order without domination, beauty without arrogance. Around 1900 BCE, it vanished. No invasion, no trace of war, only sudden abandonment. Scientists have found evidence of vitrification, stones fused as if by intense heat, possibly from unknown disaster or natural cataclysm. The city's silence is almost deliberate, as if its people walked away rather than perished. What memory did they carry with them into the future, and into us? The pattern repeats like a mantra: construction, brilliance, dissolution. From the Minoans of Crete to the Olmec of Mesoamerica, from the Cycladic Isles to the deserts of Peru. Cultures rise in harmony with the earth, flourish and fall when the rhythm shifts. We call it progress when it suits our pride, collapse when it humbles us. Yet perhaps it is neither, only the breathing of the planet itself. In this breathing, humanity plays a role both magnificent and small. Each generation builds upon ruins it scarcely comprehends. The cathedrals of medieval Europe were raised upon Roman foundations, which stood upon Celtic shrines, which rose upon Neolithic burial mounds. Even now, modern cities are layered upon ghost grids of the past, subway tunnels crossing ancient rivers, highways following prehistoric trails. The living world is built upon the dead, not out of desecration but continuity. Memory never truly disappears. It merely changes language. The ancients may have understood this better than we do. The pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and the step temples of Mesoamerica all mimic the same archetype: the sacred mountain, the axis between heaven and earth. In myth, the mountain is not only a structure, but a state of consciousness, ascent, illumination, return. The Sumerians called it Ekur, the mountain house, dwelling place of the gods. The Maya called it Vits, the cosmic hill. Across cultures, it symbolizes the human desire to connect the finite with the eternal, to climb toward memory itself. Science, for all its precision, now edges closer to myth than it dares to admit. The geological record shows multiple cataclysms: volcanic winters, magnetic reversals, impact events, each capable of erasing civilizations and rewriting life. Around 12,900 years ago, a comet or asteroid struck the ice sheet of North America, triggering floods that reshaped continents. The Black Sea, once a freshwater lake, was inundated by the Mediterranean in a single catastrophic breach, an event many link to the story of Noah's flood. Each disaster becomes the seed of myth, the memory of survival carried forward in allegory. If these cycles are natural, then the lost epoch is not anomaly, but inevitability. Humanity rises and falls with the rhythm of the stars, each age rediscovering fragments of what came before. Our myths of gods, of teachers from the sky or beneath the sea, may be the encoded memories of previous selves, echoes from civilizations that reached similar heights, spoke similar questions, and met similar ends. And yet, there is beauty in this recurrence. Each Renaissance is not repetition, but refinement, the same melody played in a new octave. The fire that burned in Sumer now burns in silicon, the same curiosity transmuted into circuitry. The symbols carved on stone are now etched in code. The old temples have become observatories, the priests reborn as scientists. We are the continuation of the same yearning, to understand, to connect, to remember. But if the cycle continues, so too does its shadow, forgetfulness. As the world accelerates, we risk another amnesia, a digital flood instead of a watery one. Our data, our archives, our history all depend on fragile machines that could vanish in an instant. The modern world, so proud of its permanence, may be the most perishable of all. 1,000 years from now, what will remain of our cities, our languages, our truths? Perhaps only the traces that mirror those of the ancients, strange alignments, inexplicable ruins, myths of gods and machines. Maybe this is the hidden purpose of ruin, to remind each epoch that it is temporary, that permanence is an illusion. The stones of Angkor, the walls of Mohenjo-Daro, the terraces of Machu Picchu, they all whisper the same truth. Everything returns to the earth. And the earth, in its silence, keeps the memory for us until we are ready to hear it again. In the humid dusk of the Cambodian forest, the air hums with insects and the faint scent of wet stone. Roots twist around the faces of ancient towers, swallowing their smiles. Somewhere beneath the moss, a forgotten inscription waits for light. The temple, like all memory, is both ruin and seed. When the wind moves through its corridors, it sounds almost like breathing, the world exhaling the names it has not spoken in 10,000 years. And in that breath lies a kind of promise. The lost epoch is not gone, it is asleep. Each discovery, each excavation, each dream of Atlantis or Lemuria or the first time is not nostalgia for the past, but intuition of what is to come. The cycle will turn again. The light will return. The ruins will rise. For history does not move forward, it unfolds. And perhaps, in the end, we will find that every age of forgetting is only a pause between heartbeats, the universe gathering breath before remembering itself once more. The night sky has always been both map and mirror, an ocean of memory suspended above the shifting world below. Long before telescopes, long before even writing, humanity gazed upward and recognized in those distant lights the shapes of its own story. Hunters and serpents, queens and floods, birth and fire. The constellations were never merely stars. They were reminders, anchors against forgetting. Yet what if those myths of the heavens were not inventions, but recollections, faint reflections of something once witnessed, long before written time began? The ancients believed the cosmos itself was cyclical, that every celestial movement corresponded to a rhythm on earth. When the sky shifted, the world transformed. This was not superstition, it was observation. Ancient astronomer priests charted the slow drift of the equinoxes, marking epochs by the rising of constellations. In Egypt, the age of Taurus saw the bull worshipped. In Mesopotamia, Aries ruled. And in our time, the shadow of Pisces wanes as Aquarius begins to rise. With each age, culture resets, its myths changing tone as if guided by unseen tides. To the ancients, this was no coincidence. It was law. The heavens were the memory of the earth, and the earth the dreaming of the heavens. Modern science, in its way, agrees. The precession of the equinoxes is real, a 26,000-year wobble of the planet that alters climate, magnetism, and even visibility of stars. Its cycles align eerily with the patterns of human ascent and decline. Around 12,000 years ago, when the constellation Leo presided over the spring equinox, the world was in chaos. Glaciers melting, seas rising, civilizations reborn. Many monuments, from the Sphinx facing east to Angkor's stellar alignments, seem to commemorate that turning. What if the ancients built not to honor gods, but to remember the last time the sky changed? There is a strange humility in imagining time as circular. It strips away the illusion of progress and replaces it with rhythm. If every rise implies a fall, then every fall contains its own renewal. The Mayan calendar, so often misunderstood, did not predict apocalypse, but transition, a new turn of the cosmic wheel. The end was never annihilation, but awakening. What if the great gaps in human history are not missing pages, but intervals between heartbeats, pauses as the long respiration of civilization? The philosopher Giambattista Vico once wrote that history moves in ricorsi, recurrences, ages of gods, of heroes, of men. Each begins in myth, ascends into reason, and collapses again into chaos, only to rise anew. His vision was ridiculed in its time, yet echoes through modern complexity theory, which describes civilizations as self-organizing systems that naturally oscillate between order and entropy. When we study the ruins of Uruk, Mohenjo-Daro, or Angkor, we are not looking at exceptions, but inevitabilities. Each was a civilization that mistook its brilliance for permanence. Each became the next layer of myth for those who followed. In that light, the lost epoch is not a single vanished age, but a recurring state of being, a resonance between memory and amnesia, awareness and sleep. The question, then, is not whether there was once an advanced civilization before ours, but how many times we have been here before. There are patterns in the geology that hint at this recursion. Every 100,000 years, ice advances and retreats. Every few millennia, magnetic poles wander and sometimes reverse. Mass extinctions, impacts, solar flares, supervolcanic winters, each leaves the same scar, a thin dark layer in the rock, a signature of interruption. If intelligence arose before, its traces would be buried not just by soil, but by time itself, recycled into the crust of the planet. The Silurian hypothesis, proposed by scientists Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt, explores this very idea. If an industrial civilization existed millions of years ago, would we even know? Their conclusion was unsettling. After only a few million years, nearly all direct evidence, metal, concrete, even bones, would vanish. Only subtle anomalies in carbon isotopes or sediments might remain. In geological terms, we ourselves are almost invisible. The earth does not preserve its tenants, it absorbs them. To think of this is to feel both small and eternal. Perhaps intelligence is not rare, but recurrent. Perhaps the universe, like the seasons, invites consciousness again and again to blossom and fade. Each time it learns a little more, each time it reaches a little farther, until one day, maybe, the cycle itself is transcended. If that is true, then we are both the children and the ancestors of worlds forgotten. In myths of fire and flood, one hears a longing not just to remember, but to surpass. The Tower of Babel, destroyed by divine confusion, is the same dream as Prometheus stealing fire, humanity grasping for the heavens, punished, then renewed. Atlantis, Lemuria, Zep Tepi, these are not warnings against knowledge, but reminders of its cost. To reach too high is to fall, yet to fall is to rise again with deeper wisdom. Perhaps that is the true pattern of the lost epochs, each one a failed attempt to reconcile matter and spirit, technology and soul. Each one burning brightly before returning to the dark to begin again. Today, our civilization hums with the same nervous brilliance that might have illuminated the last. Satellites orbit like artificial stars. The internet pulses like a neural web across continents, and the night sky itself glows with our reflection. We have written our myths in circuitry and silicon, and our gods are algorithms. Yet beneath this digital dawn lies the same vulnerability as before, the same dependence on fragile memory. A single solar storm, a shift in magnetic field, a century of neglect, and our entire record could dissolve into dust. Future archaeologists, if there are any, might find only plastic fossils and radioactive shadows, the faintest whispers of what we thought eternal. The silence of the past should caution us. If an earlier civilization once reached this same height, its ruins may be invisible precisely because they were technological. The deeper truth may be that every age of reason ends in forgetting not through arrogance, but through speed, progress accelerating beyond stability until the system itself collapses into stillness. The ancients spoke of this as hubris, but perhaps it is simply entropy. The universe demands rest. Still, there are moments when the veil thins, when memory flickers like a pulse returning to a long-stilled heart. Standing before the Great Pyramid, one senses not the achievement of a single culture, but the echo of something collective, planetary, timeless. The same geometry reappears in Angkor, in Teotihuacan, in the mounds of Cahokia, and the terraces of Peru. Each points upward, not just physically but spiritually, as if all were tuned to the same forgotten frequency. Could it be that these monuments were not built merely to honor the dead or mark the heavens, but to preserve resonance itself, the memory of a vibration that once unified the human mind with the cosmos? Some physicists speculate that consciousness and matter are intertwined through quantum coherence. That thought and world reflect one another. The ancients may have known this intuitively. Their temples were not places of worship, but of alignment, architectures designed to synchronize the inner and outer worlds. When that harmony faded, so too did their civilizations. The lost epoch, then, may not be buried under stone or sea, but within us, the forgotten capacity to remember in unity, to experience the world as sacred rather than separate. Each ruin, each myth, each rediscovered pattern is not evidence of their failure, but of our potential. We are the descendants of their intention, carrying forward the spark that once illuminated their age. Perhaps this is why the idea of forgotten civilizations stirs something deeper than curiosity. It is not about proof. It is about recognition. The ruins we seek are metaphors of the self, the buried temples of memory, the submerged cities of awareness. To excavate them is to awaken the ancient within. Every discovery, whether in stone or spirit, is an act of remembrance. As the stars wheel overhead, we continue to search, mapping our planet, our past, our sky. Yet the real map may be inward, a constellation drawn not in light, but in knowing. When the ancients carved their symbols and aligned their monuments, perhaps they were not recording where they were, but who they were. They knew that the world outside was only the reflection of the world within, and that to remember one was to awaken the other. And so, beneath the stillness of the night sky, we find ourselves again in the same position as those before us, looking upward, uncertain, filled with wonder. Perhaps the cycle is nearing another turn. Perhaps the next dawn is already forming in the dark. Whether it will bring enlightenment or oblivion, no one can say. The only constant is the rhythm itself, the breathing of the cosmos, the heartbeat of forgotten ages echoing through us still. The stars, indifferent yet intimate, bear silent witness. They have seen it all before, the rise of light, the fall into shadow, the yearning of beings who called themselves the first. They will see it again. And perhaps, when the next civilization looks up at them, they too will feel this same quiet tremor of recognition, this same whisper of déjà vu. We have been here before. Because history is not a story of beginnings and ends. It is a circle drawn in the dust of eternity, and the dust remembers everything. There is a moment before dawn when the world feels unmade, the air still, the horizon suspended, the light not yet belonging to either night or day. It is the same hush that must have greeted the first human who ever remembered. Perhaps memory itself was born in such a silence, not as recollection, but as recognition. The faint awareness that time had already turned before. Every civilization, no matter how radiant, must one day stand in that hush, facing the threshold between what was and what will be. The lost epoch is not only our past, it is our reflection, waiting in the next mirror of history. The fragments we have gathered, the stones of forgotten temples, the maps of vanished lands, the myths that bleed across cultures, all form the anatomy of a memory too vast to fit within a single age. The Atlanteans, the builders of Tiwanaku, the sages of Zep Tepi, the engineers of Göbekli Tepe, they are less identities than archetypes, voices in a recurring dream. Their monuments are our own subconscious speaking through the soil. What we call discovery is often only remembrance wearing a new name. Perhaps it is no coincidence that as our technology accelerates, our fascination with the ancient deepens. We stare at satellite images of desert ruins, at sonar scans of drowned cities, and we sense an ache older than curiosity. It is nostalgia for something we cannot define, an echo of a world where science and spirit were not divided, where knowledge was reverence. The ancients may not have been gods, but they understood godhood as an equation of harmony, energy balanced between earth and sky, between the seen and the unseen. In the modern age, that balance trembles again. We have reached outward, into atoms, into galaxies, into code, but the inward journey remains unfinished. We have measured the universe yet forgotten how to listen to it. Perhaps that is the true amnesia, not the loss of data, but of meaning. The ancients built monuments to align with the heavens. We build machines that drown out the silence. But the silence persists, patient, waiting for us to remember the conversation. The pattern of rise and fall continues, as it always has. Our age, too, carries its omens, melting ice, shifting poles, storms of fire and flood. It is tempting to see these as punishment, yet they may be reminders, the earth whispering in the same language it used before, urging its children to awaken. The lost civilizations may not have been destroyed by wrath, but by forgetting their rhythm with the planet. The ruins they left are not warnings carved in stone, but invitations to remember the dance. There are scholars now who speak of the Anthropocene, a new epoch shaped by human hands, by industry, by the alchemy of fire and metal. We have become a geological force, leaving our own thin, dark layer in the strata. To future eyes, it will look like a scar, traces of carbon, plastic, radiation, the unmistakable signature of a species that dreamed itself infinite. And yet perhaps beneath that scar will lie the seed of renewal. Every ending carries the blueprint of its beginning. When the glaciers retreat again, when the continents shift and the stars rearrange themselves in the ancient wheel, another world will rise from our ashes. They will find fragments of us, towers half buried, shards of glass fused into crystal, satellites fallen like stars. And they will wonder, as we do now, who built these? How did they live? Why did they vanish? The questions will be the same, the awe unchanged. For curiosity, too, is cyclical. It is possible that even now, under our feet, the memory of that next civilization is already forming. Ideas are fractal. They survive collapse by embedding themselves in dreamers. Some truths reappear again and again. The sacred geometry of life, the music of numbers, the unity of opposites. These are the constants that bridge the epochs, the threads that tie consciousness across extinction. Perhaps we are not the survivors of the last cycle, but the architects of the next. Throughout the ages, mystics have spoken of the Akasha, the record of everything ever known or felt, woven into the fabric of space itself. In physics, we call it information, the quantum data that can neither be created nor destroyed. Every thought, every heartbeat, every ruin remains encoded somewhere in the infinite. To remember, then, is not to look backward, but to tune inward, to the frequency that still hums beneath the noise of time. The lost epoch is not in the past. It is in the resonance between moments, a note sustained beneath history's melody. If we listen closely, we might hear that tone again, in the stillness between waves, in the pulse of stars, in the rhythm of our own breathing. It hums through the pyramids and cathedrals, through the circuits of our machines, through the coral reefs rebuilding themselves after devastation. Memory is not something we possess. It is something we belong to. There is a haunting symmetry between the first fire and the first circuit, between the first symbol carved on stone and the first code written in light. Each represents the same hunger to make the invisible tangible, to preserve what would otherwise be lost. And yet each carries the same fragility. No invention, no empire, no network is immune to time. The lesson of the lost epoch is not despair, but acceptance, that impermanence is the heartbeat of eternity. Even the stars themselves will fade one day. But before they do, they will ignite new worlds, new chances. The universe is not a graveyard, but a garden, and every death is only a germination. Perhaps civilizations, too, follow this cosmic agriculture, each flowering briefly before seeding the next. The ruins of today are the soil of tomorrow. At night, when power grids flicker and the city lights dim, there are moments when the old world reappears. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of ghosts, the same river that guided the builders of Stonehenge, the farmers of the Nile, the priests of Chichen Itza. Their constellations are ours, their myths embedded in our neurons. We are the continuation of their dream. To look up is to meet their eyes across the gulf of millennia. Perhaps this is why the stars move us, not because they promise something beyond, but because they remind us of something within. We have been here before, looking upward, wondering what came before us and what waits beyond. That wonder is the thread that binds all epochs, the bridge between the first spark and the last. And if there is a message hidden within the lost epochs, perhaps it is this: that consciousness itself is eternal, migrating through form after form, body after body, world after world. Civilizations rise and fall, but awareness endures, learning, forgetting, dreaming, remembering. The earth may shift, the sea may drown, the ice may return, but the pattern remains. The universe is patient. It will keep teaching until we remember the lesson. Maybe that lesson is simple: to live not as conquerors of the world, but as participants in its memory. To see the sacred not in gods above, but in the breath that links every being, every stone, every star. The ancients knew this and carved it into the geometry of their temples. We, too, must carve it into the geometry of our minds. As dawn finally touches the horizon, light seeps over the ruins of the earth. Mountains once temples, oceans once roads. The first rays strike the old stones of Göbekli Tepe, the towers of Angkor, the sands of Giza. In that light, the epochs blur. Time folds upon itself. The ancient and the modern are the same moment, reflecting endlessly in the mirror of existence. And in that reflection something stirs, not fear, not triumph, but recognition. A whisper moving through wind and water, through dust and dream. Remember what you are. Because in the end, there is no lost epoch. There is only memory itself, dreaming through the shapes of worlds, waiting to awaken once more.